Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of the Buyer First Ask Me Anything. I am your host, Carole Mahoney, waiting for you to all put me right into the hot seat. So if you haven't sent in your questions to me already, now's the time. So type those into the chat pane or into the chat window, depending on which platform you're watching us from. Now, we have up to 30 minutes for today. So if for some reason we don't get to your question, please don't worry. I promise that we will make up for it in our next Ask Me Anything session. Or if there's time later on today, I will make sure that I get into the comments and answer those for you. So please also feel free, directly message me through whichever platform you're on so that I can get to your question as well, or if you don't feel comfortable sharing it. Now, some of you might be wondering, why am I so obsessed with being buyer first? Why is it so important to me? And you've probably heard me mention, if you've been following me on LinkedIn, that survey data from LinkedIn that suggested that 67% of sellers say that they put their buyers' interests above all things, but only 23% of their buyers actually agreed with it. Or you may have heard the stat that 90% of executives ignore irrelevant and impersonal messaging, which I think is actually kind of a low number. I mean, who are these 10% of executives who pay attention to spam? I'm not sure that they actually exist. But the real actual reason that I'm obsessed with being buyer first is the golden rule. You know the golden rule. They who have the gold make the rules. And buyers are certainly writing the rules today, aren't they? So isn't it about time we understood what those rules were? Now, this is just one of the biggest reasons why I'm obsessed with the data and the research around how we change our own behaviors and how we help others to make decisions. Quite simply, this is how we solve problems. This is how we make the world a better place, in my humble opinion. Now, your chance to be part of this mission to transform sales from this pushy, slimy, sleazy perception to one that is a trusted and credible, as much as a doctor is today. We can do this by using data and science in how we structure our sales conversations. And you can start by typing those questions into the comment for me there. So I'm going to be sure to cover those as we go through it. Now, while you're thinking, though, of your sales challenges right now and your questions about how to be buyer first, I do have a couple of questions that were already sent in to us that I want to make sure that we get to. So let's dig into our first question. All right, so first question, what is the best way to capture buyer attention early in the process? Oh boy, we're starting with this one, huh? Okay, how much time do we have? Okay, well, we have 30 minutes, so I can probably cover this question. It has come up a lot lately, so much so that I've been writing a chapter on it for the Buyer First book in the last couple of weeks, and the chapter alone is already 8,000 words. It's only a 60,000 word book, and that one chapter is taking up quite a big chunk of it. So let's see if we can distill this down. Now, I've heard some stats thrown around recently about how much less effective outreach is to new buyers. For example, HubSpot recently released an interactive industry benchmark data. It's an interactive map, so we'll throw that link up for you. If you haven't checked this out, it's a really great resource. But they've gathered benchmark data from over 100,000 companies. And I noticed that since the pandemic, sales email sends have increased an average of 151% across all industries. But response rates went down 38%. So we're spending more time sending more mail and getting even less responses back than we were before. So if you want to do some scary numbers, add up how much time a salesperson is spending on sending those emails against the diminishing returns of that effort. And for fun, calculate that out to see what your customer acquisition costs rise to because your cost of sales goes up so much more. Ouch, right? Just thinking about that number. Okay, so there's a lot of reasons that this could be happening, but the one thing that we have control over is how motivating our messaging is to take action, for our buyers to take action. So I came across a behavioral study. I've been writing about this in the book. So actually, you know what? Anybody want to see like a sneak peek into the book? Like I'll actually read you a little excerpt from it to answer this question. All right, talk about some immediate feedback, right? All right, let me pull it up here. Hold on. All right, so I came across this study, a behavioral study of over 500 B2B buyers from a Wharton professor, Dr. Nick Lee, and done also with B2B Decision Labs. I've been loving their research lately, in case you haven't noticed. And it showed, and let me just read this, that a quantified emotional response that concluded a contrast made buyers feel that the problem that they had was more impactful and memorable, and therefore they felt more urgency to take action on it and investigate a solution. So let's break that down. Starting with the quantifiable business impact. I mean, I just gave you an example, actually. So let's continue with the email response rate. In the book I wrote, I help software companies to develop world-class sales organizations. So using the HubSpot industry benchmark data, there's been a 155% in email sends in the software industry alone, and that 38% drop in response rate. When you do more and get less, it costs you more. Now, the business impact that this raises is the cost of sale, which increases customer acquisition costs, like we had said before. What it costs to get a new customer goes up. And so therefore, in the software and IT industry, which already has the highest customer acquisition cost, it's impacted them a lot. So here we are, we're trying to identify what this business impact is for them, for this messaging. Quantify the business impact and use emotional messaging that shows contrast. So what does that sound like? Here's what I wrote. If I were reaching out to a CEO or a CFO or a COO of an organization, I would say, software companies like yours have the highest customer acquisition costs of any other industry, and it's only getting worse. For example, during the pandemic, salespeople sent 155% more email to get a 38% less responses. And most sales leaders have no idea what to do about that. Emotional response. Now imagine finding out that there are hidden weaknesses in your sales managers that are impacting your sales team's effectiveness, or that you have the wrong people in the wrong roles, or learning that your competitors' sales teams are beating your sales teams not because of price and features, but because of sales abilities. These are just a few of the hundreds of hidden roadblocks that we help growth-driven companies like yours to uncover and solve for problems like low close rates, high cost of sale, and high attrition rates. The benefit of uncovering these roadblocks can be measured in both leading and lagging indicators. Increase your sales ability by up to 49%. Can you imagine what your sales teams could do with 49% more skills? Or cut your attrition rates in half. How would that impact your cost of sales? When you calculate the positive strategic impact of improving both your sales effectiveness and your employee retention, the upside is exponential when you consider what it costs to have an unsuccessful hire, which can be up to as much as a round of funding. These results represent the average improvement companies like yours experience working with our sales hiring and performance programs. To see how your team's selling skills compare to your competition and over 2.2 million sales professionals, click here for a complimentary analysis. You can earn your buyer's attention when you can put a number to a problem and describe it with emotion and contrast. Can you see why this is becoming such a long chapter? But this is how we get buyers' attention early in the process. We do this by earning the attention by doing our homework, understanding how it's relevant, and crafting a message that's not our value proposition, it's not our features and benefits, and it's not questions to uncover BANT. It's an emotional, quantified response that we are giving them some contrast to. The messaging that I just did shows this. And what happened is in this study, this was the messaging that made buyers feel more impact from their problem and a more credible solution. This is how you're going to be able to get their attention early in the process. And notice that most of this is talking about them. When you do this, when you have this, that means this kind of buyer first language using this emotional contrast is what is going to get their attention. You're not talking about your products. You're not talking about your features. You're talking about the impact it has on them. So love this question, obviously, because I've been digging into it so much. But this is really key to understand how we get their attention because, again, remember, buyers are making the rules here. All right, so let's dive into what our next question is, because I think I'm starting to see a little bit of a theme here. So our next question that we have coming up, let me just scroll through here and see. Okay, now, how do we get a decision maker without upsetting our champion? Yeah, this is a tough one, isn't it? I mean, who doesn't get nervous when they have to talk to their boss or someone in authority over you? I mean, most of us get a little bit nervous at that, but do you know what's even more nerve-wracking than having to talk to your boss? Having someone else talk to your boss, someone that you've introduced to them or that you've shared information with. In other words, the only thing that's more nerve-wracking than you talking to your boss is having a salesperson talk to your boss, which is why so many of us, I think, struggle with getting our champions to introduce us to them, because they're taking a risk for us by doing that. So how do we lower the risk for them? How do we do this in a way that aligns with how they buy and puts their interest first? And the thing is if you do the latter, if you do go around your contact, then there's that fear of ticking off your champion. And I see this happen a lot only because what sellers haven't done is they haven't established what their buying process is and when that decision maker should be getting involved. So you can't get decision makers involved. It's because, well, you're not proving value to your champion. But you know that if you don't get them involved, that your deal is probably not going to happen because they're the ones that are making the decision. And actually, in one survey, 83% of leaders said that they agree getting executive decision makers involved is critical to getting their deals done. But only 52% of those leaders said that they think that their team does a good job at working with the sponsors. So how do we do that? How do we work best with our sponsors to get through the doors to the decision maker without ticking them off or alienating the executive buyer? And what is it that's getting in our way from doing it? What is the fear of that really coming from? So, of course, I dug into this. The best messaging to use is one question that we have. And then the other question is, how do you get the meeting with the decision maker while still remaining buyer focused? So I found some data from Objective Management Group that talks about why we struggle with this in the first place. And I found that when we have this need for approval, and 60% of sellers do out of the 2.2 million that we've evaluated, they struggle with a need for approval, which means it impacts their ability to not only get access to decision makers, but it also has a major impact on their ability to qualify and be consultative and sell on value and negotiate, just to name a few. Here's the kicker. The better we are at being consultative and qualifying and selling on value, the easier it is to get access to the decision makers. The hardest part of this is that overcoming our need for approval to be able to do the things that I'm about to tell you can take a long time. Even with coaching, it can take anywhere from 9 to 12 months to really understand it and understand some strategies to manage it. This is one of the reasons why I recommend sellers and leaders work with a therapist. I know it doesn't seem all that cool, but if you work on your own self-acceptance to accelerate that, it's going to help your sales performance as well. When you fully accept who you are and where you are, you're not going to seek validation from others as much, and it'll be easier for you to be able to get to decision makers and qualify and sell on value. This is the inner work that we have to do to ensure that we are going to be able to do the things we know we should and are able to do. So what about the skill set? What do we actually have to do to earn the right to have access to the decision maker? You sensing a theme here? Earn the right for attention, earn the right for getting to the decision maker. Why should they give us that? And what I see missing in a lot of the conversations that we're having is about the buying process. When we have our initial calls with champions, what I hear happen is that we have our sponsors and we think we've uncovered a problem that we can solve, and we get excited. We start jumping into demos, into next steps without ever stopping and asking some of the questions we need to ask, like, when do you need to see these results? Not when do you need to have the solution implemented, or when do you want to make your purchase decision? When do you need to see results? What's significant about that deadline? Who else gets impacted if that deadline is missed or if that deadline is reached? And how much time have you budgeted for being able to implement this? How long does it take for you to make your decisions? What's the process like there in order to purchase a solution like this? How long does that take? Who gets involved? And at what point do they get involved? And when those individuals get involved, what do they need in order to make their decision? Why is that so important to them right now? You see, when we ask these questions, we get clear expectations on what their process is, when their decision makers get involved, and what those decision makers need in a timeline and why it's important. There's no need to feel uncomfortable asking for access to decision makers, because you know when the right time to do so is, because you have set that upfront contract from the beginning. So do we have time to talk about how do we message for decision makers? I think we do. All right, so let's dig into that. Now, what if you don't have a champion? What if you don't have a sponsor that is willing to introduce you to the decision makers and you're trying to go to the decision maker directly? So this is also, again, where I came across some more research from B2B Decision Labs. We're going to insert a link below so you can check it out for yourself. And it really aligned with what I was seeing in the field with my coaching clients, helped me to understand why I saw this happening. In their study, they studied 4 types of messaging for executives. And here is the thing. When you have a champion who does introduce you to your decision maker and that decision maker trusts and has a good working relationship with them, the messaging really doesn't matter. Sorry. The research suggested that there was no clear winner when you went among the 4 different types of messaging they tested. It all came from an internal sponsor. And yes, there was a little bit of variability as far as which messaging worked the best, but overall it suggested that executives will take a meeting when it's sponsored by one of their direct reports when they have a good relationship with them, no matter what messages that they deliver. So getting that referral and getting that introduction is absolutely the best way to get in the door. But when you can't, what happens if you have the champion that won't help you or they don't have a good relationship with the decision maker? That's where you need to test out some messaging. So in this lab, in this research, they tested out 4 different types. They tested a unique value proposition, where your seller shares how your solution helps to solve a problem in a new and different way, and it's better than the competitive alternatives. Turns out this didn't really actually have an impact as to whether or not executives would take a meeting, or they were just as likely to accept or decline an offer for a meeting. So our known quantifiable value propositions didn't seem to be making an impact in this study. Then there was another one that they studied, which was they called the known business initiative, and ROI. This is where we demonstrate that we've done our homework, which is the basics of what we need to do, and that we understand the challenges that they're having based on our homework. We see this a lot. I saw that you're hiring salespeople, and when that happens, this is the challenge that a lot of companies like yours have. Then this also shared a quantifiable ROI from the results that other customers like them offered. When customers used our solution, they saw a 12 to 15% return in blah, blah, blah. Now, this actually resulted in a 9 to 12% drop in how credible vendors appeared, how confident they were that the vendors could help, and their likelihood of taking a meeting. Why? These are 2 types of approaches that we've been using for years. Why is it that this study is saying that they're not effective? The reason is because of what the decision scientists call preference stability. Basically, what that means is we just don't like to change our minds once we've made it up. In other words, when we've made up our minds, and we make up our minds really quickly when we have a problem, we then filter out and discount any information that runs counter to our opinion. Once we've figured out that we have a problem, we quickly decide on how to solve it. But to change this dynamic, this mind fastness, this preference stability, we need to offer new information that people didn't know, that they changes how they think about the problem or changes the ranges of options that they think they have or the solutions that they think presented to them. We've got to add more value than Google. We have to be able to tie the dots together for them and give them something that maybe they hadn't thought of or considered before. So to introduce this new need that they hadn't considered before, this unconsidered need is some kind of an opportunity that they didn't fully appreciate or know that they had. I actually used this a little bit in the message that I shared before when I talked about how the hidden reasons why their sales teams are losing and how does that compare to their competition. These are things that they might not know. So the other thing that they tested was a competitive benchmark offer. This is where sellers offer information comparing their executive company to other similar companies. Ideally, it includes exclusive data that developed with the customers in relevant industries. The HubSpot industry benchmarks, that's an example of this. See, this is what happens though, is that when we offer executives a chance to see how they stack up arranged key competitions, this presents an issue that's externally sourced to them. It introduces maybe unknown challenges or problems or missed opportunities that they didn't really know or appreciate. It offers new information. But you don't want to stop there. You want to make sure that you have some kind of a case study or story for credibility that demonstrates specifically how you can resolve this unconsidered need or new problem that you've just identified. You ever heard the phrase, don't come to me with a problem unless you've got a solution to go with it? It's kind of how this works. When you quantify that business impact and share some preliminary calculation of how your solution can impact revenues or cost savings and operating margins, this is why it's important to slow down, to do your research, to understand your buyer's industry, their current trends, and well, whatever you can do to immerse yourself into their world. You see, when you add more to the conversation than Google, this is a huge opportunity to truly help your champion and get to your decision maker with confidence. This is how you'll be able to get them involved without taking off your champion. It's how you'll be able to add true value in their experience. But this is the best part of all of this. Test it out, try it out, let me know how it works, check out the research, and actually experiment with this. This is what sales is all about. It's an experimentation based on science, based on data. All right, I think we have time for one more question. Let's see. Doug says, expectations measured with quantifiable metrics. So great. Yes. And you know what? I think we kind of overcomplicate this sometimes too. We can simply pull research from external resources like I did with the HubSpot data, like I've done all throughout here and pulling different research and data points here. This is how we can truly add value to our buyers. The tricky part, I know, is the time it takes to do the research and to understand what research is really relevant. And at first, it may seem time intensive and cumbersome, but I promise you that the more that you do it, the faster and more efficient at it you will get, and the better messaging that you'll be able to develop for your buyers. I actually have a quick story on this. I had a coaching client that I was working with who is an SDR, and he had this same challenge, had this same problem where he was doing a lot of outreach, trying to get people's attention, doing tons of emails and sequences, seeing less of a response. And after some coaching with him, he finally started to do some of the research, started to get into his buyer's world to understand it. One day he gets on the phone with me and I could tell emotional, like his voice is cracking and he almost looked like he had tears in his eyes on Zoom, which isn't easy to see. And he's like, I have to play a call for you. And I was kind of nervous because I'm like, when someone gets on a call and they're that emotional, is this going to be a good call to listen to? And he's like, yeah. This is a great call to listen to. He reassured me. And he started to play the call about this meeting that he had set up for his rep. And towards the end of the call, the sales leader said, I just have to let you know, whoever's been training so-and-so, I need to give them kudos. Because in the 4.5 years that I've been a sales leader, I have never paid any attention to any of the outreach messages that come to me. In 4.5 years, he's ignored outreach, except for this one time, for this one BDR who did his research, who did his messaging, had contrast, had emotion, had a quantifiable business impact. He said, that's the reason I took this meeting. I wasn't even considering this solution. I had no idea that it was even going to be on my radar. But because he did that research and did that messaging, I was willing to take the meeting. And I wanted someone to have kudos for that because whatever you're doing over there, you're doing something right. He was so thrilled to get those kinds of kudos because it was like he finally had broken through something. He'd finally taken all of that effort and all of that work and seen it pay off. You can do the same thing in your outreach. Prospecting doesn't have to be this grind where you're constantly beating your head against a wall. Dare I say, it could actually be fun. I know, crazy. But you could be making cold calls with a smile on your face and delighted that you're actually finding people who want to hear your message. It can happen. It's not a unicorn. It does exist. All right, let's see if we have time for any other questions that are coming in. I see a couple of comments here. Thank you so much for your comments, Doug. Everyone else, check out our next Ask Me Anything. It is coming up on May 17th at noon Eastern time. And ask me anything about how to prospect so that you're not pushy, slimy, and sleazy. How to follow up in a way that doesn't sound like, hey, just checking in, getting an update, touching base, or even how to get referrals and introductions. These are all sales topics that we can talk about and how to make them buyer first, how to follow the golden rule. So until next time, everyone, join me here. And if you want more science-based tips before anybody else hears them, make sure you sign up for our monthly newsletter that we put out on the last Sunday of every month, where I just go deep into some of the research that I've shared here, but any other research that I've also found as I'm working on the book and as I'm trying to help you to change the sales profession from ew to yes. Until next time, everybody, keep sharing, keep learning out there, and have some fun with it. Bye, y'all.